Freud, for instance, uses the term libido in the sense of a sexual energy.
Yeah.
Now that is not quite correct, then it is a power, like electricity, any other form of manifestation of energy.
There is a current in you so potent it can build or destroy. You feel it in the quiet moments, a low hum beneath the heartbeat, a fire that stirs when desire wakes. Most people spend it carelessly, scattering the very force that could shape their destiny. Ancient mystics called it the seed of creation, a power meant not just for pleasure but for transformation. When this energy is wasted, something vital slips away. When it's honoured, it becomes fuel for clarity, magnetism, even spiritual awakening. The difference between the two is not chance, it's choice, and the choice begins now. The hidden fire within. Beneath the surface of everyday life, a current runs quietly, often unnoticed yet impossible to extinguish. It pulses in the body, shapes the way we think and dream, and fuels both desire and creation. Many people mistake it for nothing more than a biological urge, a drive to reproduce, a passing heat. But those who sit with it long enough begin to sense something far greater, an inner fire that does not belong to flesh alone. It is both wild and sacred, a flame that can burn or illuminate depending on how we tend it. This fire has been recognized for thousands of years. In the traditions of India, it is said to rest at the base of the spine, coiled like a sleeping serpent. Kundalini, they call it, a force that waits for the right moment to rise. When it awakens, it does not simply stir the senses, it unravels the hidden layers of consciousness. Stories tell of sages trembling as this energy surged upward, carrying them into states of clarity and bliss they could not have reached by thought alone. The serpent becomes a ladder, with each coil serving as a rung that carries the human spirit closer to its divine source. Some teachers warned that if awakened prematurely, the serpent could cause imbalance, overwhelming the unprepared with visions and desires they could not yet contain. Modern psychology, in its own way, brushed against the same mystery. Carl Jung saw sexual energy not as a narrow instinct but as a form of psychic energy, the root of our creativity and transformation. He spoke of libido as more than longing for physical union. It was the drive that writes poems, paints canvases, builds cities, and even seeks God. For Jung, repressing this energy was dangerous, but so was squandering it without understanding. He recognized what the mystics had whispered, that this fire must be honored if it is to give life instead of consuming it. Think of how it moves through the world around us. A child bursts with it when their imagination overflows, turning sticks into swords and clouds into kingdoms. An artist feels it when a vision won't let them rest until it is born in colour and form. Lovers experience it in the trembling silence before they touch, when the air itself seems charged. In each case, the same force is at play, shifting its shape, wearing different masks but always pointing back to the same source. Sexual energy is life's deep impulse to express itself, to overflow, to create. And yet, with every flame comes shadow. Fire warms, but it also devours. Without awareness, this energy can slip into obsession, leaving us restless, unfulfilled, and empty. We feel it pushing at the edges of our skin, and if we do not know how to guide it, it scatters in directions that weaken rather than strengthen us. The same spark that could have become art or insight dissolves into smoke. The vitality we were meant to live with fades, leaving us searching for it in more and more fleeting moments. Mystics understood this duality well. They knew the body was not just flesh and bone, but an altar, a place where sacred forces gather. They spoke of breath and meditation not as pious rituals, but as tools for shaping energy, directing it upward, refining its raw power. They believed that to treat sexual energy as mere instinct was like tossing a torch into the wind. It sputters, it vanishes. But when handled with reverence, it lights the path ahead. Practices arose not out of denial of the body, but out of the recognition that every breath, every gesture could shape the flow of this energy into something lasting and luminous. There is a strange beauty in how the ancients and the moderns meet here. The serpent of Kundalini and Jung's psychic fire, though clothed in different language, both whisper the same secret. Within us lies a well of energy far greater than we realize. It is the pulse that sustains life, the rhythm behind our heartbeat, the silent push behind our longing to become more than what we are. And from here, a deeper question begins to stir. If this fire is so powerful, what happens when we let it spill away without care? The high cost of dissipation. There is a quiet cost to carelessness, one that cannot be measured in coins or hours, but in the dimming of spirit. When sexual energy is scattered without thought, something inside grows dull, as though the wick of a lamp is shortened with each flame allowed to burn uncontrolled. At first it feels harmless, momentary pleasure, a fleeting release. But the pattern is not so small as it seems. Energy, once lost, does not quickly return, and what could have fueled vision or creation instead leaves only weariness behind. Taoist masters spoke of this centuries ago. They warned of Jing loss, the steady draining of life essence through indulgence. Jing was not merely a physical substance, it was vitality itself, the foundation of longevity and strength. To waste it, they said, was to shorten the thread of one's own life. They compared the body to a reservoir. Each act of dissipation, each careless overflow, was like opening the sluice gate a little wider. Slowly the reservoir empties, and when it does, there is no water left to irrigate the fields of creativity, clarity, or spiritual growth. The old parable of the farmer and the leaking jar captures this truth well. A man carried water each morning to nourish his crops, yet the jar he used was cracked at the base. Day after day, water slipped out unnoticed, soaking the dust of the path rather than the roots of his plants. He wondered why his fields remained dry despite all his effort, why the earth gave him so little in return. Many of us live as that farmer lives, carrying our energy without awareness, unaware that it escapes us through habits that never fill the soil of our lives. Look closely, and the signs appear everywhere. The fatigue that comes too quickly after indulgence, the dull haze in the mind clouds both thought and focus. The lack of motivation that once felt like fire but now flickers only in brief sparks. It is not punishment, but consequence, the natural outcome of energy allowed to leak away rather than being guided with care. Even the brightness of the eyes, once clear, alert, almost luminous, loses its shine when the inner flame is not guarded. Yet this is not a call to shame or fear. To notice loss is not to condemn oneself. It is to awaken. The human body is not meant to be a prison of denied instincts, but neither is it built to pour its richest essence into the dust again and again. When awareness sharpens, the pattern becomes visible. Each choice to scatter energy makes the vessel lighter, emptier, less capable of carrying life's weight. In this way, dissipation is not only about sexuality. It is about the principle of how energy flows, whether it is preserved and transformed or drained and forgotten. Consider how many great works are never born because the energy that might have birthed them was lost to compulsion. How many inventions, poems, and songs never crossed the threshold into the world because their fuel was already burned in fleeting fires. History remembers those who conserved their power long enough to pour it into lasting creation. But countless others, just as gifted, dissolved their gifts in the fog of unawareness, and so their potential vanished like mist in the morning sun. The loss does not stop with the individual. Energy radiates outward, touching relationships, shaping communities. When a person is drained, their presence feels thin, their attention scattered. They cannot give fully because they have already given themselves away in fragments. The world around them receives only pieces when it might have been nourished by wholeness. Just as the farmer's cracked jar deprived the land of water, a leaking spirit deprives the world of its natural share of vitality. But the human story has always carried both warning and possibility. Where there is loss, there can also be recovery. Awareness of the leak is the first step to mending the jar. When the reservoir is protected, when the flame is tended, energy begins to return. The eyes brighten, the voice grows steady, the will strengthens. This is not mere discipline, but a recognition of value, the decision to treat sexual energy as treasure rather than waste. What we often call lust is only a restless current, waiting for the hands that know how to steer it towards something higher. The alchemy of desire. Desire is not the enemy it has been made to be. Beneath the layers of shame and fear, it is a spark, a restless tide of energy calling us towards something more. The danger lies not in its presence but in its direction. Left unguarded, it spills into hunger without satisfaction. Guided with care, it becomes the very force that lifts the human spirit beyond its ordinary limits. Alchemists of old understood this principle, though they spoke in the language of metals and furnaces. Paracelsus, the Renaissance mystic and physician, taught that transformation is not about destroying what is base, but refining it into gold. The lead is never discarded. It is heated, worked upon, and through fire reveals its hidden purity. Desire is much the same. We do not need to crush it, deny it, or cast it into shadow. We must learn to hold it in the fire of awareness until it changes shape, until its raw restlessness becomes the strength that builds, creates, and illuminates. The body becomes the crucible for this work. Each pulse of longing carries within it a choice, to disperse the energy outward into fleeting pleasure, or to draw it inward and upward, letting it rise like vapor toward the higher centers of being. Tantric teachers describe this path as a ladder. At its lowest rung, sexual energy stirs the senses and excites the flesh. But rung by rung, if guided with reverence, it climbs toward the heart, the mind, and finally the crown, where it dissolves into the vastness of spirit. The same energy that could chain us to instinct can just as easily carry us into union with the divine. In the words of ancient mystics, this ascent was less a harsh command than a gentle unveiling. They saw desire as a hidden current, like a river running beneath the earth, waiting to be redirected toward the roots of the soul. When it is allowed to rise, not rushed but guided with patience, it nourishes places within us that we did not know were thirsty. It is tempting to imagine this work as grim self-denial, but in truth, it is a deepening of pleasure. For when desire is not squandered but elevated, it does not disappear, it expands. A quiet kiss becomes a meditation, a glance across a room becomes an awakening, a simple breath becomes ecstasy. Those who walk the path of transmutation discover that fulfillment does not come from emptying the vessel, but from allowing it to overflow in subtler, higher ways. What happens inside is mirrored in the outer life. The artist finds themselves overflowing with vision when their energy is not constantly drained. The thinker discovers clarity where once there was only fog. The seeker feels devotion arise naturally, not as an imposed discipline, but as the natural flowering of energy climbing toward its source. The alchemy of desire reshapes not only the inner landscape, but the very fabric of daily living. Still, this path is not without struggle. The furnace of transformation grows hot, and the pull of habit can feel relentless. Desire demands movement. It resists being contained. Here lies the true art, not suppression, which leads to bitterness, and not indulgence, which leads to emptiness, but the middle way of transmutation. Each time energy is held without scattering, it builds, it gathers, it strengthens, until what once felt impossible becomes natural. The fire no longer consumes, it illuminates. The struggle, though fierce, has its own quiet gift. In holding the tension between hunger and restraint, a new kind of strength is born, one that does not depend on constant release but on inner steadiness. Each time the current is redirected, it engraves deeper channels through which higher states of clarity and devotion can flow. There is a subtle joy in realizing that nothing within us is wasted. Even the wildest longing carries a seed of holiness when brought into the light of awareness. What once dragged the spirit downward can be the very force that lifts it upward. Just as Paracelsus taught that within lead rests the hidden image of gold, within desire rests the hidden image of awakening. To see this is to begin to treat every pulse of energy not as a problem, but as raw material for the soul's ascent. Sooner or later, every seeker finds themselves at the same threshold. How to take this rising fire and turn it into a daily practice. The body as a sacred vessel. The body is not a prison to escape, but a vessel to be honoured. Within its rhythms and chambers lies the alchemy of life itself. Every breath, every beat of the heart is not just survival, it is a ceremony. When we begin to see the body this way, what once felt ordinary reveals its secret holiness. Breath becomes the first key. Yogic traditions speak of pranayama, the art of guiding the breath, as a means of directing energy. Inhaling with awareness draws subtle currents inward, and exhaling releases what is stagnant. This simple act, repeated with devotion, turns the lungs into bellows for the inner fire, fanning sparks of awareness that lie hidden in the depths of the chest. When seen this way, even the simplest gestures, standing tall, breathing deeply, walking with awareness, become acts of reverence. The body ceases to be something to escape or shame, and instead reveals itself as the ground upon which spirit and matter meet in quiet ceremony. The body listens to how we use it. When energy is scattered, it grows dull and heavy. When energy is gathered, it shines. Muscles hold memory, the belly stores unspoken emotion, the spine carries both the weight of habit and the possibility of rising. Through gentle restraint and meditative attention, these hidden storehouses begin to loosen, and the energy that was once trapped starts to flow upward like smoke seeking the sky. Across the African continent, there is a word for this sacred current: ash. It is the force that animates the body, flows into the voice, and extends into the community. To have a strong ash is to live in such a way that one's very presence nourishes others. Energy stored in the body does not remain locked away. It radiates. A smile carries it. A word carries it. Even silence can carry it, like the still heat of the sun at midday. Science, too, offers echoes of this ancient knowing. Studies of breathwork and meditation show measurable changes in heart rhythms and brain waves, as if the body tunes itself like an instrument when cared for with discipline. What was once dismissed as mystical metaphor now appears as tangible resonance, proving that energy shaped within us is never contained. It is felt, seen, and shared. Stillness, too, is a practice. When the body is stilled in meditation, it becomes a temple. Thoughts may race, impulses may pull, but in the discipline of remaining unmoved, something deeper stirs. The restless waters of the mind begin to clear, and in that clarity, the body is revealed as more than flesh and bone. It is revealed as the altar upon which the spirit chooses to dwell. The vessel is not fragile. It is resilient when tended with reverence. Practices like breathwork and meditation polish it, just as ritual polishes sacred objects until they shine. When energy rises through the spine, the vessel does not shatter, it expands. The channels of the body, once constricted, open like rivers after rain, allowing more light, more force, more presence to flow. There is a paradox in this work. Restraint creates abundance. To hold the energy is not to imprison it, but to concentrate it, to allow it to reach places it could never touch if wasted. Just as a lamp glows brighter when its oil is preserved, the body glows brighter when its energy is cherished. This glow is not only physical health, it is a quiet radiance that others feel in your presence, even if they cannot name it. Energy moving upward transforms the very way we inhabit the world. A person who has learned to keep their vessel whole speaks differently, listens differently, and touches differently. Their body is no longer just their own. It becomes a channel through which something greater speaks and acts. This is why the mystics treated their bodies with reverence, not out of vanity, but because they recognized them as instruments of the divine song. Every culture has whispered reminders of this truth, the yogis with their pranayama. The African elders speak of ashe. Even modern seekers rediscover that when the body is aligned and charged, the mind becomes sharper, the heart becomes softer, and the spirit feels near. The vessel is not separate from the sacred, it is the sacred in living form. And slowly, the light we tend within begins to touch other hearts, changing the way we meet and hold one another. Attraction, magnetism, and the aura. The air around certain people feels charged. You notice them before they speak, and when they finally do, their presence lingers like fragrance in a room. This is not simply charm, nor is it reducible to physical beauty. It is the quiet radiance of energy that has been gathered instead of wasted, refined instead of scattered. A field begins to form when sexual energy is held with care. In ancient traditions, this subtle glow was called an aura, a luminous body that extends beyond flesh and bones. Sensitive eyes saw it as colour, sensitive hearts felt it as warmth. Modern language might call it vibe, but whatever the term, the reality is that life force conserved within spills outward, creating a magnetic atmosphere that others instinctively respond to. Some traditions describe the aura as a shield, others as a mirror. A shield because it protected the one who carried it. A mirror because it reflected the inner state outward for all to see. If the energy within was restless or scattered, the aura appeared dim. If it was refined and centered, it became radiant, impossible to ignore. Magnetism has always fascinated seekers. Nikola Tesla, whose inventions reshaped the modern world, was rumoured to have chosen celibacy to conserve his creative fire. Whether legend or truth, the story points to an ancient intuition. What is not dispersed fuels invention, insight, and brilliance. Even when misunderstood, such individuals carried a charge that drew curiosity and reverence, as though their very presence hinted at a hidden source of power. Energy of this kind cannot be faked. When it is real, it is unmistakable. A person who holds their inner fire does not need to demand attention. The world turns its gaze without knowing why. Strangers lean in, friends feel uplifted, lovers sense depth beyond the surface. It is as though the unseen begins to speak louder than the spoken word. With such magnetism comes a subtle responsibility. To draw others is easy, to hold their trust is harder. Those who shine without discipline may dazzle for a moment but leave emptiness behind, while those who guard their energy carefully become anchors for others, steadying the spaces they enter. In the teachings of the Sufis, another key to this mystery can be found. They taught that true attraction is not born of desire alone, but of the divine energy flowing through one being toward another. What we call love, in their view, is the recognition of God's presence mirrored in another's eyes. When sexual energy rises and mingles with devotion, magnetism shifts from the animal to the sacred, binding souls not in possession but in remembrance of the one. Desire transmuted becomes a light that shines through the skin, through the tone of voice, through the rhythm of breath. Those who cultivate it discover that others are drawn not only to them, but to the peace and strength radiating through them. This is why saints, sages, and great artists are remembered not just for what they did, but for the way their presence changed the atmosphere of a room. Yet magnetism carries both gift and test. When energy is strong, attention multiplies, and temptation can circle like moths around flame. The aura can attract admiration, envy, or longing, and the seeker must decide whether to indulge in the surface or hold steady to the deeper current. To guard the radiance is itself a practice, one that asks humility and vigilance, lest the same power that uplifts begin to unravel. True magnetism does not bend toward every hand that reaches for it. It chooses, it aligns, it waits for what resonates with its deeper current. This is how energy becomes not just attractive, but meaningful. When the aura calls forth relationships, creations, and paths that serve growth rather than drain it. You may have felt glimpses of this yourself, a time when you walked with greater confidence, and others seemed to notice without reason. A season when creative fire burned strong, and conversations opened doors you didn't expect. These are fragments of the aura's magnetism, hints of what grows possible when energy flows upward instead of dissolving outward. But attraction is only the surface, and beneath it waits the deeper spiritual purpose of holding this energy. The path of the mystic. Through every age, desire has appeared as a flame, able to warm or burn depending on how it is held. The mystics, unlike ordinary seekers, did not seek to extinguish this flame entirely, but to refine it, turning its heat into light. What for some became a restless craving for pleasure, they redirected into prayer, vision, and communion with the divine. The writings of St. Augustine give us a glimpse of this inner struggle. He confessed to being torn between the pull of lust and the yearning for something higher, a love not bound by the body. For him, desire itself was not the enemy. It was desire untethered, running wild without direction. By binding Eros to spirit, Augustine began to see how passion, when transfigured, could become devotion. In the desert monasteries of early Christianity, monks spoke of this same energy as the raw material of prayer. When temptation pressed on them, they did not merely resist, they transformed it into long vigils, fasting, and chants that carried the body's restlessness into the silence of God. They discovered that what begins as turmoil can become fuel for clarity when held with patience. Across cultures, mystics recognize the same law. The Buddhist monk who chooses celibacy is not rejecting life, but sharpening awareness. Without the endless pull of sensual distraction, the mind learns to listen more closely. Energy once scattered outward is gathered, like water pulled back into a still pool. From that stillness, visions rise more clearly and subtle truths reveal themselves. The Hindu yogis called this practice brahmacharya, a way of conserving life force so that it could rise the spine and awaken higher consciousness. To them, sexual energy was not shameful but sacred, a current too precious to spill carelessly. When it was honoured and lifted, they spoke of visions, dreams that revealed truths, and a profound sense of being carried beyond ordinary perception. Other traditions guarded this energy through ritual and prayer. In Sufi practice, the heart becomes the centre of longing, the beloved not a person of flesh but the eternal. Desire, rather than suppressed, is elevated until it becomes a bridge to God. The ecstatic dances of the dervishes were not merely performances, they were acts of alchemy, transforming the fire of human passion into the radiance of divine love. Yet this path has always demanded caution. To withhold such potent energy is to carry a storm within the body, one that can easily break its vessel if not balanced with discipline and humility. Stories are filled with warnings. Those who fell into excess or repression alike often lost their way, consumed by the very power they tried to master. The mystics remind us that sacred fire must be guided, never ignored. They too knew, the mystics, that this path could not be forced. Suppression alone hardened the heart and made the body brittle. Instead, they treated desire as a teacher, one that had to be listened to carefully and guided with respect. In their eyes, each longing pointed beyond itself, like an arrow that, if followed wisely, would lead to the eternal. What becomes striking when we look across these traditions is how universal the insight is. Whether in Augustine's Confessions or the monk's silent cell, the message is the same. The creative force within us can either bind us to illusion or lift us into freedom. Every breath, every stirring of the body becomes part of the spiritual path. Modern life rarely teaches us this art. The culture around us encourages endless consumption, feeding desire without pause or purpose. But the mystic's way whispers another possibility, that restraint is not denial, but redirection. It shows us how holding back can make the heart burn brighter, how silence can sharpen hearing, how solitude can deepen connection. To walk this path is not about fleeing the world, nor about clinging to rigid rules. It is about learning to recognize energy as sacred and to choose, moment by moment, whether we waste it or weave it into meaning. That choice, repeated quietly through the days of a life, becomes a hidden current of power. Even today, this teaching appears quietly in unexpected places. Therapists speak of sublimation, the process of channeling instinct into art, service, or creativity. Though the language is different, the principle remains the same. The very impulses that seem to threaten balance can, when redirected, become the foundation of beauty and healing. The mystics simply carried this truth into the realm of the soul. Perhaps this is why mystics so often seemed magnetic themselves. Even when they lived far from crowds, their presence carried a weight, a resonance. They had touched the fire within and survived its test, and that made others feel both awe and unease. They remind us that the deepest transformation is not a spectacle, but a quiet revolution of the heart. And so the question rises again, not as doctrine, but as invitation. In the midst of our modern distractions, what might it look like to guard our own fire and to let it light the path ahead without consuming us? Modern reclaiming of energy. The silence of monasteries fades, and in its place, the hum of cities takes over. Yet even here, in the busyness of screens and endless tasks, the same current that mystics guarded still flows through us. The question becomes, can modern people, living in noise and distraction, learn to treat sexual energy not as a problem to escape, but as a power to direct? Psychology was among the first to frame this energy in a way that resonated with the modern mind. Sigmund Freud saw that sexual drives were not only about reproduction, but also about creativity and ambition. His idea of sublimation suggested that the very force of desire, when channeled, could fuel works of art, science, and invention. A painter who pours longing into the canvas, or an entrepreneur who channels restless desire into building something new, carries echoes of this process. Carl Jung expanded Freud's ideas by suggesting that desire, when honoured instead of repressed, could awaken archetypal forces within the psyche, unlocking visions that connect the individual to collective humanity. But Freud's framework, though groundbreaking, often painted human beings as creatures at war with themselves. Later voices brought more hope. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on life in concentration camps, saw how even the most intense inner drives could be lifted into meaning. Desire need not be crushed or feared. It could be redirected into love, service, or vision. 4. Frankl, the energy that sought release, found purpose when tethered to something greater than survival. Science has added its own observations. Studies show that restraint in one area of life can enhance focus in another. Athletes and performers often speak of conserving energy before big moments, not only physically, but emotionally. It is not abstinence for its own sake, but the recognition that energy stored becomes energy available. This echoes ancient wisdom but grounds it in laboratory findings, showing the nervous system sharpening attention when impulses are held consciously. Popular culture hints at this truth, even if clumsily. The fascination with semen retention among some modern men is one sign of the hunger to rediscover power through discipline. While some interpretations are shallow or misguided, beneath them lies a genuine recognition that what is squandered thoughtlessly weakens and what is honoured strengthens. The body knows when it is respected, and the mind follows. Yet there is a danger in treating energy as mere currency to hoard. Hoarding breeds stagnation, just as waste breeds emptiness. The deeper task is circulation, moving desire upward into thought, creativity, compassion, vision. Breathwork, meditation, and even simple mindful pauses in daily life allow the body to recycle what might otherwise be lost. It is less about gripping tightly, more about learning how to let the current climb rather than spill. In this way, modern reclaiming is less about denial and more about re-enchantment, allowing the raw pulse of instinct to become the very fuel for insight, art, and devotion. Technology complicates the story. Endless access to stimulation has created a culture of depletion. Where once desire moved us to seek connection, now it can be numbed by instant gratification. This drains not only vitality but also motivation, leaving many restless yet unfulfilled. To reclaim energy in this age means resisting the cheap flood of images and choosing instead to cultivate inner fire deliberately. At the same time, modern neuroscience shows the brain's capacity for rewiring. Dopamine, once hijacked by endless scrolling or compulsive pleasure-seeking, can be restored by intentional practice. Fasting from overstimulation, focusing on meaningful goals, and grounding in rituals resets the nervous system. In this way, the ancient call to discipline finds a fresh mirror in the language of brain chemistry. Communities too are rediscovering the power of shared practice. Yoga studios, meditation groups, and even support circles for those who wish to reclaim focus all point toward a collective hunger to rise above scatter and fragmentation. These spaces echo the temples and ashrams of old, reminding us that energy multiplies when cultivated together. To reclaim sexual energy in the modern world, then, is not to reject the body or desire, but to recognize their deeper role. They are invitations toward creativity, connection, and transformation. In the end, energy becomes less about control and more about offering, learning to direct passion toward life itself. Now the story touches each of us, asking that we decide what it means to carry this power responsibly. Living with the flame. To carry this energy is to walk with fire, not a blaze that consumes forests, but a hidden flame that waits for hands willing to tend it. The ancients knew it as life force, as soul breath, as the golden thread binding body and spirit together. Today, most forget it until it bursts out in restlessness or longing, mistaking its wild call for hunger that must be silenced. But what if the task was not to silence it at all? In many traditions, the body itself was seen as the temple lamp, the very vessel where divine fire chose to dwell. The Hermetic saying, "as above, so below," whispers of alignment. The fire that stirs in our bellies reflects the same fire that lights the stars. To ignore one is to forget the other. When sexual energy is treated as sacred, it no longer feels like a private burden but a participation in cosmic order. The flame we hold within becomes a mirror of the great flame above, and tending it becomes an act of harmony with the universe itself. In moments of stillness, this truth becomes clear. A single breath, deep and unhurried, fans the flame without scattering it. Breathwork, meditation, even a quiet walk beneath the night sky. These are ways of keeping the fire alive without letting it burn through recklessly. It is not suppression, but devotion. To sit with the warmth of one's own energy is to learn the art of companionship with the self. Even science hints at this mystery, observing how focused attention can alter heartbeat, hormones, and even the rhythms of the brain, as though the flame responds to the gaze of awareness. Mystics often compared this path to tending a lamp in the wind. The lamp does not rage against the breeze, nor does it surrender and extinguish itself. It shields the light, feeds it oil, and trusts that in time its glow will guide others. So too with us. The more we protect the inner flame from the storms of distraction and dissipation, the more it grows steady enough to shine outward, touching lives without even a word. Desire itself changes when seen through this lens. It no longer demands immediate fulfillment. Instead, it ripens into vision. The artist feels it rise as colour and form, the seeker as prayer and silence, the lover as tenderness that transcends flesh. What once pulled us down becomes a current that lifts, reshaping even ordinary acts into something radiant. A meal, a song, a gaze, all become charged with the quiet electricity of a flame that has not been wasted. Still, the flame is never fully ours to control. There are days when it leaps unexpectedly, when temptation feels heavier than intention, when the pull of old patterns presses hard. These moments are not failures but reminders. The flame is alive, and like all living things, it demands respect. To stumble is to learn, to return is to deepen, and to tend again is to prove the flame's worth. The wisdom of carrying fire has always included paradox. It is strength and fragility, freedom and discipline, joy and burden. Those who walk this path discover that the more reverence they give the flame, the more it gives back, not only in vitality and clarity, but in an abiding sense of being connected to something vast. The flame teaches patience, humility, and the sweetness of slow unfolding. The more we live as guardians of this flame, the more life begins to feel less like chance and more like deliberate creation, as though the universe itself were shaping through us. Over time, the hidden fire ceases to feel hidden at all. It becomes the quiet center of one's being, a hearth around which thoughts, feelings, and actions gather. Life feels less scattered. Even suffering, when it comes, is met with the warmth of a flame that refuses to die. This is the gift of living with the flame. It offers direction when the way seems uncertain, and light when shadows fall heavy. And yet, this is not the end of the journey. To live with the flame is to begin again each day, learning how to walk in step with mystery. The flame may one day reveal purposes still unseen, doors not yet opened, paths not yet imagined. Perhaps what we have called energy is only the first language of something greater, waiting to speak. The invitation is not to hold on to this as a final answer, but to carry it as a beginning. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this message spoke to you, feel free to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep exploring the deeper mysteries together.